Hello everyone, my name is Karti and today I want to tell you about United States Army of Europe and Africa. In the last video my friend aka Dmitrij already talked about the Soviet troops in East Germany. In this video it will be about the same, but now about the US Army in Europe and Africa. You can also support me with your donations in the pinned comment. Thank you. So the grouping of American troops in Europe was formed immediately after the end of the fighting of World War II on the basis of the 7th Field Army of the United States, which made its way from North Africa and Italy to France and Germany. In the winter of 1944-1945, the 7th Army fought to liberate Alsace and Lorraine. Its units also became the first American troops to reach the Rhine. Before its disbandment in April 2010 year, the 7th Army commanded all American occupation forces in Europe, and 23 year some of its units took part in the Iraq War. On 15 March of 1947 year, United States Force European Theater USVET was replaced by the Army Command known as European Command EUCOM. The army element of the Joint European Command Headquarters was initially called Headquarters, U.S. Ground and Services Force Europe. On 15 November of 1947 year, U.S. Ground and Service Forces Europe was renamed U.S. Army Europe USAREUR to accord with the new department of the Army nomenclature for such command. The officers and personnel of the General and Special Staff Divisions of the EUCOM headquarters performed USAREUR's General and Special Staff duties. The principal function of the commanding General of USAREUR became the establishment and maintenance of high standards of discipline. General Hubner also became commanding General USAREUR. The Berlin blockade began 24 June of 1948 year when the Soviet Union blocked the Western Allies railway and road access to the sectors of Berlin under Allied control. Even though Allied forces in the city were outnumbered 50-1, General Lucius de Clay, in charge of the US occupation zone in Germany, gave the order for the Berlin airlift. Headquartered out of Wiesbaden Army Airfield, the Allies supplied almost 9,000 tons per day of supplies to the beleaguered city until the blockade was lifted on 20 May 1949. From 1948 year to 1950 year, Cold War tensions grew, and the outbreak of hostilities in Korea in June 1950 year heightened East-West tensions in Europe. The 7th Army was reactivated at Waihingen, Stuttgart in late November 1950 year. The two U.S. Army division-sized units in the U.S. occupation zone of Germany, the 1st Infantry Division and the U.S. Constabulary, were assigned to the 7th Army. Within a few weeks, other assignments to the 7th Army included the 5th and 7th Corps. Due to President Truman's 10th December of 1950 year declaration of a national emergency as a result of circumstances in the Korea War, 4 CONUS-based U.S. Army divisions were elected to move to the U.S. occupation zone of Germany. A main concern was possible Soviet attempts to take advantage due to their numerical superiority in Germany during the Korean War. The first augmentation division to arrive overseas in Germany was the 4th Infantry Division in May of 1951 year, followed by the 2nd Armored Division and the 43rd and 28th Infantry Divisions during summer and fall of 1951 year. A new joint multi-service United States European Command was established in Frankfurt, Germany on 1st August of 1952 year. General Matthew B. Ridgway became commander and General Thomas T. Handy deputy commander. On that day, the U.S. Army headquarters at Heidelberg, formerly known as EUCOM, became headquarters United States Army Europe. It remained in Heidelberg under the temporary command of General Handy, who wore two heads in both US EUCOM and USAREUR for a while. In 1953 year, the Korean War armistice was signed and tensions began to ease in Europe. About 30,500 soldiers, remained each of the USAREUR divisions. New equipment fielded at the time included the M48 tank, the M59 armored personnel carrier, and tactical nuclear weapons. On 25 October of 1955 year, the Southern Europe Task Force SETAF, a logistical command, was formally activated in Italy. The headquarters, commanded by Major General John H. Michaelis, was temporarily established at Camp Derby near Livorno, Italy, with units additionally stationed in Vicenza and Verona. Shortly after activation, SETAF moved the headquarters to Caserma Passalacca in Verona, Italy. An airborne battalion eventually joined SETAF. On 15 July of 1958 year, USAREUR forces were ordered to assist the Lebanese government. Task Force 201, the army component of Operation Blue Bed, rapidly deployed more than 8,000 soldiers from Europe to Beirut by air and sea. As the situation quickly stabilized, all US forces are deployed from the country within 4 months. Suddenly, on the night of 12 August of 1961 year, the Soviets closed the border crossing points and began to construct the Berlin Wall, isolating the three western sectors of the city, both from East Germany and the Soviet sector, or East Berlin. In response, the United States deployed an additional armored cavalry regiment to Europe, along with additional support units. USAREUR strength reached a post-World War II high of 200,000, 342,000 in June of 1962 year, as the crisis deepened. That from 1946 to 1991, Cold War maximum USAREUR troop record gradually reduced over time. Almost all other US forces worldwide were at the AFCON 3 per JFK's 22 October speech and direction to the Pentagon. On 1st December of 1963 year, the separate 7th Army headquarters was eliminated and HQ USAREUR became headquarters and headquarters company, US Army, Europe, and 7th Army. The first redeployment of forces from Germany took place in 1968 year with the removal of about 28,000 military personnel from Germany. The units and personnel withdrawn remained committed to NATO and during refurbished first return of forces to Germany, conducted in January 1968 year. More than 12,000 soldiers returned to Germany for an exercise using pre-positioned equipment. In the late 1916 year and early 1970 year, the needs of the war in Vietnam reduced USAREUR's assigned strength, sometimes drastically. As the war began to wane, forces began to return to Europe, and USAREUR adopted a new system based upon the community commander concept. In 1974 year, efforts to streamline the headquarters resulted in the termination of the U.S. Theater Army Support Command and its replacement by a smaller organization, the 21st Theater Army Area Command, now known as 21st Theater Sustainment Command, TSC. The dramatic events of the late 1980s year, the opening of the Berlin Wall, German reunification, and the collapse of the Soviet Union combined to change USAREUR again. Intermediate nuclear weapons of the 56th Field Artillery Command were withdrawn. Chemical weapons were moved out of Europe, and units began to depart of the European continent, while others were inactivated. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990 year, USAREUR began deploying units to the region. The first deployment from USAREUR to Saudi Arabia in August 1919 included the 45th Medical Company, an element of the 421 Medical Battalion AA, and advanced elements of 12th Aviation Brigade, which by September had deployed two Apache attack helicopter battalions, an OH-58 Kiowa Scout Helicopter Company, a Black Hawk Utility Helicopter Company, a CH-47 Chinook platoon, and associated support and maintenance units. These were quickly followed by the intelligence specialists, chemical warfare experts, logistical personnel, many individual replacements, and finally almost the entire 8th Corps. After the Gulf War and the subsequent drawdowns, USAREUR faced a wholly different challenge in Europe. The command was engaged in humanitarian support operations to include disaster relief and rescue and recovery, peacekeeping, and non-combatant evacuations. Between 1919 year and 1993 year, the command supported 32 deployments, which involved a total of 95 and 579,000 personnel. In early 1999 year, in response to growing ethnic tensions in Kosovo and military and paramilitary forces and daily conflict resulting in the more than 1,500 Kosovo Albanian deaths and 400,000 refugees, USAREUR formed Task Force Falcon with the 1st Infantry Division as the core element. On 9 June of 1999, after an inconclusive air campaign, Task Force Falcon deployed forces in the largest combined air, rail, sea, road movement since Operation Desert Storm, entering Kosovo on 12 June of 1999 year as part of Operation Joint Guardian, a NATO-led peacekeeping force with a UN mandate to separate warring factions or see the withdrawal of Serb forces and interdict the flow of arms to insurgents. By the beginning of 2014 year, the American military presence in Europe was reduced to 24,000 people. The last American tanks were withdrawn. The number of formations of the ground forces decreased to only 2 brigades, the 173rd Airborne Brigade of the United States in Italy and the 2nd Cavalry Regiment in Germany. All Army, Corps and Divisional headquarters were disbanded. Today, in connection with the events in Ukraine, the contingent of the US Army began to strengthen again, but that's another story.